that it will also be recorded. So I need a motion to adopt the agenda for today.
So moved.
And again, maybe we should, I mean, I know that these aren't as important, but if we make a motion, let's say who it is, and just because sometimes it'll overtalk each other.
Yeah, Jeff Greenfield moved to adopt the agenda.
TRS second.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to adopt today's agenda as is. We also need an approval of the minutes from December 4th. I hope you have had a chance to read those.
Madam Chair, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
So moved to adopt the minutes. Janice Muller.
TRS second.
Thank you. And this is a chance for public comment. I do see we have some public here. Let me see here. Chance for the public to comment on any public matter that's not on the agenda, but is within the jurisdiction of the Teachers Retirement Board. However, the board may not vote on any issues raised unless it's included in the packet. And if issues are raised that would require board approval, they'll be included on an agenda for future meetings. Public, I'm sorry, I can't see this very well. Public matter does not include disability applications or contested cases or other adjudicative proceeding. So thank you for joining us. I saw Sarah was here and a few others. Does anybody have anything they would like to say today?
Just a comment for Scott. It doesn't look like there's much snow in Yellowstone.
I'll be making a change in my background here in just a few minutes because we got lots of snow in Yellowstone.
All right. Let's see here. So let's move on to then the executive director's report. Sean, executive summary, please, all these discussion items.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the board, so I blew this up to 125%. Hopefully you're able to follow along on your,
yeah, that's better.
Likely on the laptop. So the first item there is operations update. You know, when I put the packet together, it was January 26th. Nothing has changed since that point in time. So the TRS office is still closed to walk-ins for the most part. If somebody shows up at our door, we certainly help them, especially if they've driven any distance at all. But for the most part, the door is locked. We have 7 staff that are working full-time in the office, and the remainder of the staff is working partial days in the office. And we have been able to continue essentially full operations outside of not being open to the public for just general walk-ins since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Really without any issue. Staff has done a wonderful job of keeping up with their workload, even though they're working remotely for part of the day. As you all know, Jeannie Schmidt retired. She was our imaging tech here at TRS for a number of years, and her replacement is Melissa Goodman. So she's our newest imaging tech. We have 2 imaging techs at TRS. Melissa comes to TRS with several years of experience as an imaging tech from Print and Mail Services. And she actually uses the exact same software that we use here at TRS, which is Perceptive Content Management. So she's been able to hit the ground running. So we're happy with her hire. She's done great for us so far. Any questions on those first 2 items? All right, so the next piece is legislation update. Actually, quite a bit has happened since I wrote this on January 26th. As far as our bills that we requested, House Bill 88 was the TRS housekeeping bill. It's being sponsored by Representative Marta Bertoglio. The bill was heard in House State Admin. There was a fair amount of discussion. The committee took executive action on January 12th and passed the bill out of committee 19-0, and then on January 18th, it eventually passed the House 97-2. So it's been transmitted to the Senate and has been referred to the Senate State Administration Committee, and it's awaiting a hearing. I think that they'll probably start hearing some of those House bills next week in Senate State Admin. So it'd be nice to get that one moved along and passed before some of these other bills I'll talk about in a minute start having hearings. The second bill that we requested on behalf of the board was Senate Bill 46, and that's the University System Supplemental Contribution Bill. Senator Ryan Lynch out of Butte sponsored that bill on our behalf again this year. It was heard in Senate State Administration on January 13th with very limited discussion. There really weren't very many questions at all. On January 20th, the committee held executive action and voted to table the bill. So it's currently sitting in Senate State Admin and is likely dead. As far as other legislation that could potentially affect TRS, there are a few bills out there. The first one is LC 974. It just yesterday was made public, so that bill draft is available. It's essentially a study bill that would take place over the interim. TRS along with PDRS will be asked to participate in that. I don't really see any big problem with doing so. If nothing else, it provides a good education for legislators that are really interested in the pension systems. And that'll be a joint resolution, so I fully expect that one to pass once it's finally heard and moved through the process. The next one is LC 1179, which it just this morning was assigned a bill number, which is now House Bill 323, and it's actually a funding bill at the request of Representative Terry Moore. So it just yesterday was available for public consumption on the law's website. So I have sent these ones that are now available to our legislative committee, which is Scott Dobbs and Jeff Greenfield, and we're actually going to meet to discuss TRS positions on all these bills this afternoon after our board meeting. But LC 1179, essentially, it provides automatic funding. So the employer contribution rate would either increase or decrease depending on the actuarial determined contribution, which is going to change from one year to the next. You know, in some respects, it's kind of a neat concept. It would take our existing liability as of July 1, 2021, and it calls it a legacy liability. And that liability has to be funded over, depending on if we amortize in 29 years or 28 years, over a closed period, whatever that ends up being. And then any new liability that comes about as a result of either assumption changes or adverse market experience or anything that creates an actuarial loss would have to be funded in no more than 10 years using layered amortization period. So every year that you have an actuarial loss or an actuarial gain, it would get layered in. So theoretically, you know, once we were under this provision for any length of time, let's say that starting out we're 28 years for the legacy, and any new liability can never be more than 10 years. So once we're into this, you know, say 18 years, then the system would never, after that point, ever have an amortization period greater than 10 years. So it sounds great, but the only issue with it is as you might imagine, the employer contribution rates then become volatile. I mean, they would sort of, in some respects, follow the market return to some degree. I mean, we would still smooth that return. It wouldn't be as drastic as the market, but employers' contribution rates could swing, you know, a percentage or even more, depending on exactly what happened. Or if we were to adopt considerably more conservative assumptions, like if we were to lower the rate of return assumption by a full percentage, that right away would create a fairly large liability that would have to be amortized in 10 years versus, you know, currently when we do something like that where we lower the rate of return or we have a bad market return, that liability is amortized over right now 29 years. So just something to be aware of. I mean, it sounds really good from the system's perspective, although we have to recognize that we have stakeholders that have to be able to pay those contributions. So I'll talk more about that with the legislative committee this afternoon. When I wrote this on the 26th, LC 1195 was not even, there was no text available on that. And that's a bill by Senator Mike Lang. And once again, I think this is the third or fourth session in a row, Senator Lang is wanting to amend the provisions in 19-20-732, which is our reemployed retiree statute. And for those of you that aren't real familiar with that provision, it allows a retired member to come back to work for up to 3 years currently in their lifetime if they retired with 27 or more years of service credit and the district that they're working for was unable to fill up a position. It's kind of an emergency hiring provision is what it's supposed to be. Last session, there were several changes that were in Lang's bill that actually ended up becoming law, and a couple of those were they lowered the years of service from 30 to 27 to be eligible to work under the provision. He removed superintendents from being eligible to work under the provision. And they made it so that only Class 2 or Class 3 school districts were eligible to use this provision. His changes for the current session would leave most of that in place, other than he's adding back superintendents so they would be eligible. And he is increasing the number of years that teachers would be able to work under this provision from 3 years during their lifetime to 7 years during their lifetime. So, I mean, 7 years in any circumstance, I don't know how you can continue to claim you have an emergency if you have sort of fundamental problems with your hiring practices if you can't figure it out in 3 years. So I haven't talked to Scott and Jeff yet, but we will this afternoon. I would imagine TRS will oppose those changes. I'm fairly sure we will. Scott's nodding his head. So beyond that, there are a few they're not really pension bills. There's a bill that just came through yesterday I have to do a fiscal note on, and it eliminates any public funds being used for conventions or conferences, obviously, which would affect TRS if it were to pass. And there's just a few other sort of general things that really are more state agency, statewide kind of bills that there are those out there that are trying to pinch pennies and cut corners and those sorts of things, but they really don't impact the system overall. So I didn't list them here, and really they just were started popping this week, so they weren't even available when I put your packet together. So with that, Madam Chair, I think that gets us through A and B, and we should be to public comment.
All right, I do have a question for you on the Lang's bill. So
Yep.
is the 3 years and the 7 years, are they receiving their retirement benefits at the same time, or do they have to stop receiving the benefits while they work?
No, that's the crux of it. They get to continue to receive their benefit while earning full salary with no limit on what they can earn as a working retiree. So I ran the numbers on this yesterday. I've been keeping track of it each session. Since 2009, to date, essentially, we've had 63 individuals work under this provision, and we've paid out to those 63 individuals about $2.3 million in benefits, while we've only received $530,000 in contributions. So if they, it's hard to put a cost to this, because the actuary can't necessarily assume that they would have not retired at all, or that they would have decided to come back and suspend their benefit to take that position. I certainly make the argument, but we can't really put it in the fiscal note that we know for sure what these people would have done. But we definitely do not come out even on this. We do receive the combined employer, employee, and state supplemental contributions, all from the school district that hires a member under this provision. So right now that's 19.81%. So we get the full contributions, and we don't accrue any additional liability for people working under this provision because they don't earn any additional service credit. But we're certainly paying out more in benefits than what we're bringing in contributions.
Director Graham, this is Dan Chamberlain. I have a question about LC 974, the Frank Garner study bill. Actually, I have three.
Okay.
One, in the bill, is there any time frame listed, and have they asked for funding, or is it at that stage yet?
So the language just became available yesterday. I mean, the timing of it would all occur over the interim, and they would make a recommendation to the 2023 legislature. So they want to be wrapped up in the fall of 2022. As far as funding go, there is a provision in there if they want their own actuarial analysis that they need to provide funding for that for themselves, which is good. I don't really see that bill as being a real big danger to us. In fact, I think it's going to be helpful because we're going to have an experience study. Really, we'll get the results of it not this May, but next May. So once we get our 2021 valuation completed in October of 2021, the actuarial will start working on our experience study. We'll get the results of that experience study in May of 2022. And, to the extent there are any actuarial assumption changes that are recommended and approved by the actuary and then approved by the board, there's potential that we could possibly be just over 30 years or, depending on how that all goes. So I think it actually will be a good process to go through, and hopefully, we'll have some input on how that committee goes. Obviously, we can't dictate what the ultimate recommendations are from the committee, but we'll at least be involved in the conversation and be able to advocate for the defined benefit plan and really maybe push forward for some sort of sustainable fixes if they're necessary.
Thank you. That's reassuring because it appeared to me at first glance that the potential impetus of the bill was to identify how much better from their perspective defined contribution might be as opposed to defined benefit. So I hope that isn't the impetus. I actually had a long conversation with Diane Fladmo recently, and she thinks apparently that Mr. Garner is relatively reasonable. So. Yeah,
that would be my take on it as well. I think it's more. I think it's a real study. I mean, let's take a hard look at what sort of incremental changes can be made to make the systems more sustainable. I think really what Representative Garner wants to do, but obviously I can't speak for what might happen to those legislators that end up being on that committee.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
It's also an opportunity for public comment.
Is it all right if I pop in here? This is Sarah Piper with MFPE.
Absolutely, Sarah. Thank you.
Hi. With regards to Garner's bill, as Diane shared with you, I've actually been on the committee that's working on drafting the language. And so I've had quite a few lengthy conversations with Representative Garner about it. I think that he has the right idea of moving the conversation to a time frame where it's not so condensed. And also I like that the bill includes a lot of language on the stakeholders having to be a broad swath. So it's not just legislators, on the floor of the House arguing about it. So we are likely going to support it unless it gets wildly amended as a better alternative to, knee-jerk fixes. So I second what she has shared about Garner's intentions with it. And I'd say a good chunk of the committee that's been helping draft it, there's always some doubts on some people and things when you get a big committee together. But I think the overall goal has been solid. So.
Thank you. It's a good perspective to have. Anything else? All right, then seeing none, we'll move on to the IT manager report with John.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair. I'm hoping you all had a chance to read through this so that I won't repeat it verbatim, but I wanted to give an update on some initiatives or some projects from an IT standpoint that TRS has been working on for the last couple of years since the last time I presented IT manager's report to you. So our content management system was going through a planned migration previously. As I've noted here, we were going to switch back to IBM FileNet from Perceptive Content, and that was after having just completed the migration to Perceptive Content in 2018. That had to do with the fact that the state had re-signed a new enterprise contract with IBM. Not all the functionality that was present with Perceptive Content, unfortunately, was available with the FileNet product that was purchased by the state. It's not that FileNet can't do the functionality we were looking for, it's just it wasn't purchased by the state of Montana. Because of that, a number of state agencies had chosen to remain using Perceptive Content. They'd already had enough investment into that content management system that they decided to remain with that vendor and use the system hosted by Highland, the vendor on Highland's cloud. That was vetted through the state CIO and state CISO, Security Information Officer. And by about midsummer, the realization came to us here at TRS that we had put money into mTrust. We had developed mTrust specifically to feed metadata into Perceptive Content. We'd invested that money and we were going to lose that functionality. Arguably, we were either going to have to buy a product from IBM to re-enable that functionality and then redevelop our system to integrate with IBM FileNet, or we were going to have to go back to manual data entry, which was really not a good option. I don't think any of us think that moving back to manual data entry makes sense. So I recommended by the end of summer that we stay with Perceptive Content as well. We jumped on board with the other state agencies, got in on that contract to continue using Perceptive Content hosted by Highland, the vendor. Shortly after we did that, the Department of Commerce also joined. So there's 6 agencies currently utilizing Perceptive Content as their CMS system with this individual or independent contract. Department of Justice is also using it, but they have their own on-premise installation of it. So as I noted there, the annual cost to us is negligibly different by going with a vendor. There was a one-time cost for the migration to Highlands Cloud, $13,500. Given the fact that we invested money in mTrust to utilize Perceptive Content and we were going to have to turn around and invest money somewhere else to get our system to work with IBM FileNet, I believe this was far better, far less expensive than the business process changes and the coding changes necessary for us to switch to another system. So we decided to stay with Perceptive Content. The good news is since we've moved to Highlands Cloud, it seems like our performance using Perceptive Content has actually improved slightly. Just last week, I loaded 15,500 documents through an API program up into Highlands Cloud, and occurred in just under 1,000 seconds. So I know that's kind of a weird metric, but those were decent sized Word documents that were loaded up into a cloud somewhere at more than 1 document per second. So performance, that was better than what we were seeing before. The next topic there, the Report Manager migration replacement. So the reason we were going to migrate Report Manager to IBM CMOD was because we were going to be moving to IBM FileNet. With the decision to remain with Perceptive Content, then there really wasn't a good avenue or a reason for us to migrate Report Manager onto IBM Content Manager on Demand, CMOD, because we weren't going to have the FileNet servers here to host it on. We did have one discussion with IBM about running their Report Manager or their CMOD product as a software as a service on their cloud. The cost really wasn't going to be any different. We were still going to be looking at about $150,000 uplift for that migration. And then we would be using a separate product from our content management system. So we are no longer made the decision to no longer pursue migrating Report Manager into IBM CMOD, and instead we are coming up with a plan to migrate Report Manager directly into Perceptive Content. In the last 2 or 3 weeks, Highland Enterprises has stood up a test environment. Rex Merrick is working with them on getting that environment customly configured to handle our Report Manager content. We're working out the technical details of how to have mTrust deliver the reports directly to Perceptive Content instead of Report Manager. And simultaneously, at the same time, we've got a small group of us that are working on identifying what current content in Report Manager we want to migrate up to Perceptive Content. We've got data going back a significant number of years, and not all of it is necessary to be retained, but we want to identify what we want to retain so we only have to move that which we wish to keep. So that Report Manager migration project has changed course, and right now we don't have any budget outlay for it because it's going to be an in-house migration to an existing product. Back in 2018, we reported about starting off with a source code repository project. Happy to report that project went into full production in December 2019, so we are 1 year into usage of that. It's worked really well. We have 4 environments, repository branches set up in the repositories that handle all of our source code, and changes propagate into that repository from the developers, and then they get pushed out or synchronized out to the application servers. And it's given us a fallback. It's given us the ability to analyze and compare data between dev, test, staging, and production. It's given us the ability to revert if necessary. And we've got really good control of our source code now, and it's wholly owned and hosted here on TRS owned server running in our virtual environment. So that's in full production. It's been working very well. In October, we converted from Microsoft or from Oracle database backend as our backend data layer for the mTrust system to Microsoft SQL Server. As I noted in here, the reason TRS was running Oracle database had to do with the fact that when we did the initial migration from Pension Plus to mTrust, the goal was to have the two run side by side, and there was no method to run Pension Plus with a Microsoft SQL backend. There was no ODBC drivers to allow for that, so Oracle was chosen. Oracle is a fantastic database system. We didn't have any problems at all with it, other than cost. And as noted in here in my notes, it's a significant cost savings that we've realized by migrating to Microsoft SQL Server. So we've got 2 SQL servers running now. One of them hosts our dev, test, and staging databases. We have another SQL server that's hosting just the production databases, so the only data that's being run off that is strictly production. That data is backed up nightly. We haven't seen any performance issues at all since we've migrated from Oracle to SQL, and you can see that our cost savings have really, really gone down. So that was a great job. Most of that work was performed by our contractor, but it was a collaborative effort, and it went very smoothly. And it's nice to know that we're saving a significant amount of money annually now by running off of Microsoft SQL Server, which the state has enterprise license for. And my last topic here was our COVID-19 response. It's been an interesting year, as I'm sure it has been for every one of you and for all of us. But I think across the board, it's kind of been like a really hard look at what IT environments look at. Moving into this last year, our focus was we had microcomputers here hosting virtual desktops for all our users. It was cost effective. It allowed flexibility. Everything worked really well. Everything was solid state. And all of a sudden, March 2020 rolls around, and it turns out that it's not that great for mobile computing. So as I've noted in here, is we, like almost every other business and every other state agency, had to make the jump to allow for almost 100% remote work. We did it very quickly and successfully. We did it with some help from Empera upstairs, so big kudos to them. They lent us some laptops to get us up to speed, since we didn't have enough laptops to provide all of our employees with state-owned equipment. So our shift now has been moved away from microcomputing to where we're actually going to outfit all TRS employees with mobile laptops that will allow them to work just as they were before here in the office, but take that computer and walk out of the building and go home and connect through a VPN tunnel back into the state network. For the users we've got set up and doing that now, it's working very well. Within the next year of inventory replacement cycles, we should be up to where we have almost 100%. We have a handful of employees that will always work here on site, the imaging technicians, front desk. So we don't need to go 100% laptop equipped, but we're moving that direction. But overall, I think TRS responded extremely well. I think we were able to get people out of the office and working remotely, and with really, in retrospect, not a huge change to business process. Not everybody has physical access to paper documents like they did in the past, but I think the management team's done a really good job of working out the details of how we get those paper documents into people's hands. And so I think our response has been really good. Any questions on any of that long story, long report I just gave you guys?
It's good information, John. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
John, I did have a question. Are there additional security concerns as a result of laptops leaving the building?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the honest truth is yes, there is, Scott. So the reason we provide laptops to users and the reason we want to have users working from remote laptops is the fact that the method for them to connect into the state network is through a VPN tunnel that's run by the state of Montana. In doing so, the user has all the same restrictions on that laptop as if they were sitting right here in the building. If that laptop isn't up to date with the Windows operating system, it won't let them connect. If that laptop tries to visit a website that the state doesn't allow, the laptop can't get to that website. If the user can't access webmail while they're connected into the state network through that VPN tunnel. So what the state's done is it stood up a pretty good security barrier in that VPN tunnel that's a requirement to access the network. And not only our employees, but our developers, AMA developers, Alfred and Roy, are both coming in through that VPN tunnel, as is our project manager. So from a security standpoint, we have very similar security profile as we would have as if they were in the building. That being said, there's always the potential that something gets put on that laptop or that laptop gets exposed to something when it's not connected to the VPN tunnel. But the next time that laptop connects to the state network, either here inside this building or through the VPN tunnel, it's scanned and it's identified. And we've actually seen that where we've had a computer connect. The NOS, the state's security center, network operations security center, gets a hold of me and says, we just had a device connect that's one of yours, and we see this piece of bad information or bad malware on it, and it needs to be addressed. So I think the enterprise has done a really good job on responding to remote work. And I think by us being able to put state-owned laptops into users' hands, we've brought our security level up to be on par with the enterprise. There is a few of us that are still working remotely. I still come in through the Citrix tunnel on my home computing, my home system. And in essence, what that is using Citrix remote desktop services. we're coming in through another software server as opposed to running directly off the laptop. We're running a virtual environment inside of a browser. It's not as efficient, and it's the state's least desirable method to access remote work. But it's understood that we couldn't put 16,000 laptops in 16,000 state employees' hands in the matter of a couple of months. It just wasn't budgeted for. So given that, I believe that we have all but 2 or 3 TRS users currently coming in on state-owned laptops through the VPN tunnel. And it's just a few of us that I have remaining that are coming in through Citrix. And as we go through the next replacement cycle, we'll rectify that as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there any
The
public?
one thing that I'd like to just sort of touch on again is on this. John covered it, but I just want to make sure it sort of sinks into the board. You know, this report manager migration, the board budgeted a little over $150,000 for us to do that migration in this current fiscal year. And by deciding to stay with Perceptive Content Management, we're going to actually save the bulk of this $150,000 altogether, because we're going to do this migration in-house. And instead of going to an IBM product with the migration, we're going to tie it back into Perceptive, which is what we're using for all of our other imaging or image documents. So that's really, I think, it was a smart business decision to go this way. Once we sort of got more information about what the IBM conversion was going to look like, it made it a pretty easy decision for us to stay with Perceptive Content. And then obviously, you know, it's going to be a lot of work involved. And as John mentioned, Rex has already started working on it, but we're going to handle this migration, the bulk of it, just internally with existing resources for the most part, and save the bulk of that $150,000.
That's good news. All right, I'll allow for public comment if there is any on our IT manager report. All right, seeing none, then we will move on to the administrative business. Sean.
Okay, so administrative business, I think Nolan will give us a report on the CAFR and the audit report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Can everyone hear me okay? I've had issues.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we completed our CAFR here in-house for the fiscal year 2020 CAFR. In early December, the audit was completed kind of throughout. It was actually completed in early January, and we received the legislative audit report. I hope everyone received their hard copy of the CAFR. If not, obviously it's posted to the website. I know we sent it out to all the board members. We did receive an unmodified opinion, so that's kind of the main point. It was a clean audit in that sense. All figures can be agreed upon in any material aspects, so that's very good news. We also received a recommendation. Legislative audit identified, without getting too far in the weeds, I know Carrie sat in on a meeting, a very riveting meeting with Legislative Audit Division, where we did get into the weeds, but they identified some employer adjusts that more or less belonged in previous fiscal years. You know, and we made our arguments, you know, we make these adjustments in current fiscal year. They are recorded in revenue and withdrawal expenses, and you know, the way we've always recorded them. Legislative audit took the position that those should be recorded as prior period adjustments, and you know, after looking into it with the GFOA and or GASB, you know, they kind of agreed in the sense that, you know, these are prior period adjustments. However, they're immaterial, and you do not have to record them that way if they are immaterial. And so that's the position that we took, is that obviously these are immaterial amounts to the retirement system, and we will continue recording them in that fashion as long as they are immaterial. However, their main recommendation was that we improve our internal controls to identify those adjustments and so that we can properly record them if they are material. And have TRS concurred in with the recommendation, and we will tools, and we've already started this process of creating tools to identify these adjustments in future, you know, in the current fiscal year 21, and in future fiscal years, we will be we'll have tools to identify these adjustments, and if necessary, if they are material, we will record them as prior period adjustments. Is there any questions? I didn't want to get too into the details, but I certainly can if anyone has any questions on the audit recommendation. Hearing none, I can move on to the so we have our financials and our budget as of our December 31st, 2020, and there's a lot of good news to report. Obviously, the market has been kind to everyone, and so you'll notice, you know, our consolidated asset pension pool is up by about $200 million from this time last year, and therefore our total investments are up by around that much. We actually have over $4.5 billion for the first time, I believe, in the history of Teachers Retirement System, which is obviously good news. You can see one of the big changes on this balance sheet is that we have the zeros in land and buildings and accumulated depreciation. Those have to do with the sale of our building at on 6th Avenue, and those entries have all been made, and you can see later on, I can show you where those the gains kind of hit our balance, but obviously that's good news to kind of get those things off our books. I guess the other highlight on this balance sheet is down, you can see our year-to-date income toward the bottom there is $370 million as opposed to $52 million at this point last year. So that's what's obviously contributing to our total assets being over $0.5 billion.
Nolan, could you touch on the intangible assets again for me? Remind me what they are and why they're so different.
Sure. So our intangible assets is the mTrust project. Those we obviously have had two different phases that we have booked into Sabres, and these numbers all come from the staging system, the Sabres system. So you know, at this point last year we had just booked phase 2. So I guess as of December 31st of 2019, we had just booked 2 of those of that project, and that's why that amount was so high, because since we have booked that entry, there's been accumulated well, I guess it would be accumulated amortization expense that you know, each month those that slowly ticks down. Obviously the asset gets amortized, and therefore it kind of we expense that over a longer period of time rather than all at once, which helps our books and financials.
Thanks, Nolan.
You bet. So moving on to the fund balance statement, that's where you can see that that 879,000. The vast majority of that miscellaneous revenue is our gain on the sale of the thing. I believe it was right around 850,000, and there's obviously some other miscellaneous revenue in there, but that is the gain on the sale of the building that you're seeing in that miscellaneous revenue amount. But the big highlight is your investment revenue is obviously significantly higher than this point last year. The rest of this is obviously pretty similar to what we would expect every year. Our paid obviously goes up slightly every year. Withdrawals are real close to where we would expect them, and then our admin expenses also. And you can see that amortization expense, member Greenfield, right there in that it's significantly higher than it was last year, and that has to do with amortizing the whole project of both phases over the full year. Any questions on the fund balance statement? And the last page just kind of shows you the source of our investment revenue. It breaks it down a little bit, and it mostly obviously has to do with just appreciation of our investments, and that's where you're seeing the vast majority of our investment revenue coming in, and then our breakdown of our admin expenses below. Any questions on any of the financials as of December 31st, 2020? For the operating budget status report, so you can see, overall we're anticipating roughly $150,000 to $200,000 surplus, and the vast majority of that is going to come from that CMOD project that Sean discussed, and well, obviously John and Sean discussed earlier. We will see a large savings there because we did budget for the $150,000, and we anticipate saving the majority of that. We've also just seen a lot of minor savings throughout the budget due to COVID, people not being in the office all day. So any questions on the budget status report? All right, the next page is just more informational. It kind of breaks down our last, our major category of expenditure, which is the consulting and professional services, and most of those are kind of where we would expect to see them at this point in the fiscal year. And there really hasn't been any delinquent agencies for most of the year, which is a good thing. We have a pretty nailed down process of contacting employers. We obviously always have some late reports, I guess, but none of them have really gotten to the point where we've had to put them on the delinquent agency report. They're getting them in, within a week or so of the due date, and the vast majority of them are getting it in before the due date. So, unless questions on anything, that's all I have, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you very much for the report. Let's see, let's move on to the Personnel Committee report. Janice, I'll just say something and then I would like you to maybe speak up on how we felt about the report. and Sean's performance. But as every year, Janice and I go through this with the consulting firm. Jim Cairns, was actually there, even though he had just gotten out of surgery, and he also had somebody else help us with it as well this year. They help us with the surveys, and thank you all board members for taking the survey. And they also survey the staff, and we had 12 out of 20 of our staff members respond, and we really do appreciate that. And I guess publicly I would like to say thank you so much for the input. We look at all the comments. We, you know, I know Jim Cairns' office will go through and they will, you know, we want it to be a private thing that you can do. You can say what you need to. So they will restate the comments. One of the comments that we heard loud and clear is that they want to make sure we're really going through these things and for us to acknowledge that. So I am doing that right now. And I'm also going to, as from the board, we're going to write a letter thanking the staff that, you know, for them to go through all that and take the time to do that. And hopefully we'll even get more responses next year as well. It's just helpful to us and we appreciate it. So we thank you very much for all of your input and support on that. Janice, would you like to say something else?
I would like to reiterate what Carrie said about the importance of the staff input, because it really is coming from a very different perspective than the board's survey input. So they see things on a different level and on a day-to-day basis. So we do need that input, because Carrie and I, when we did the evaluation, use that input to help come up with Sean's evaluation. But overall, Sean's performance continues to be at an exceptional level for TRS. And I think we are fortunate to have somebody that is as dedicated to our system as Sean is.
Some of the comments, just one of the things that we said we liked is just, you know, how he leads by example and is there, you know, always in the office and can be communicated to and reached. And we just, you know, you get a lot of really good feedback that you and I as board members don't see on a day-to-day basis. So we can't do this without you staff. So thank you very much for, you know, filling out the forms if you did. And we do look at all of that. So thank you very much.
It was almost also commented by Brooks Robinson, who was working with Jim, that he was impressed with the level of survey response from staff at how high those marks were, because to get a staff survey and have such consistently high marks, even though occasionally there was an outlier, is showing an impressive level of competence.
It's always interesting, and remember, that's kind of how we set the goals for Sean for the next year. And when he gives us his reports on, you know, what he's accomplishing and what he's doing at every meeting, that's where these come from. So Jim also helps us put together those things as we move forward. All right. Is there anything else, Janice, that we missed?
I think that covers it in a nutshell.
Okay. Thank you. And then, so let's look at our meeting dates. The next one is set for May 7th, and then August 6th, October 8th, and December 3rd. I like to look just at the next one for certain, possibly the next two, just to make sure we can get a quorum there. I also want to say we are really good about all being at most meetings, so this is just wonderful. It's fun to work with people who are committed to what they're doing.
Let's hope we can all be together in person.
Yes, absolutely.
Carrie, I just wanted to say on Sean's evaluation performance, I really, really appreciate how hard you work and your knowledge, and also your availability and willingness to just talk about things. So thanks.
You bet. Thank you.
would ditto that comment. I think the process we go through in Sean's evaluation is just tremendous, and obviously it's evolved into a very useful and very valuable tool. And having been on several other boards, this one really does allow us to sit down, put our thoughts, have it make sense. There's not a whole lot of generic kinds of answers you're going to provide to it. You're going to speak to what's really going on, and I really appreciate the system, and definitely appreciate not only Sean but our personnel committee for doing such a great job with that.
How does May 7th look for everyone? Is that all? Everybody good with that?
Works for me.
Works for me.
Works for me.
All right, and then let's just put out there, August 6th on your radar. But as long as we get the next meeting down, the tentative board, I always have them in my calendar so that we know when we're planning ahead. All right, and let's move to out-of-state travel. I know this probably has saved us a little money this year as well.
Yes, Madam Chair. So I wanted to just put a write-up in here and have the discussion with the board. Typically at this meeting, we would be approving several out-of-state travel requests for staff to attend some of their national conferences. Myself, usually I would get approval to attend the NCTR Directors Conference, which is usually held in May, but I get approval at this meeting. The Deputy Director and Chief Legal and Accounting Manager and IT Manager also would usually get approval to attend their national conferences at this meeting. So I met with them prior to working on this packet, and we had a discussion amongst ourselves about, number one, what are your national associations doing? Are they even offering in-person conferences? And then number two, even if they were offering in-person conferences, I mean, how willing would you be to attend? And our consensus was that, for the most part, it's looking like if they're going to offer a conference at all this spring, it's going to be virtual. And we have budgeted for those registration fees. So to the extent that staff is able to and wants to attend those conferences virtually, they'll be able to do so. But our consensus was that we did not want to ask for authority to travel out of state to any of those conferences really this spring and likely even through the summer. And so that's something for the board to think about as well, because the NCTR trustee workshop is typically held, over the summer, which isn't that far away at this point. I have not seen any announcement on what they might decide to do. I kind of suspect that if they offer anything, it will likely be a virtual conference, similar to what Scott and I attended in the fall. But I just wanted you to be aware of that and have the discussion with the board. I think it's important for us to, both as staff and for you as board members, to attend these national conferences when we can, and really by whatever means we can, if it works for our schedule. So meaning either in person if they're offered that way, or virtually, and in person more so once COVID is sort of more under control. But I think they are important. I think they do help us sort of move TRS in the right direction by hearing from our peers and seeing different ideas. So I guess I'll just introduce the discussion item and let you know that that's why you don't see any out-of-state travel requests in this board packet, but I think the board should probably discuss this to some degree as well.
Madam Chair, if I may, in relation to that, the NCTR Trustee Education Committee met this week and talked some about both the trustee workshop and the annual conference in October. And right now, neither one of them is slated to be virtual only. They're still looking at possibilities of trying to do something. Now, the trustee workshop obviously is in the summer is a little bit more tentative. However, they're working on the possibility of having a hybrid conference where perhaps some people are there and other people are doing it virtual. So that might be a possibility. They are really, really hopeful that the October conference will be able to be an in-person conference. So they're really working on that. And in terms of the materials, I think they're going to do a super job, whether it's virtual or not. Obviously, the networking part is much more valuable when it's in person. And those two conferences depend an awful lot on the networking. So they're kind of holding out for the networking as long as they can. Expect, possibly with both conferences, but expect, especially with the trustee conference, a survey to come out in March and ask for your thoughts and opinions as to whether or not you would be willing to come in person or virtual, or you know, is this even a discussion point? So expect a survey to the trustees.
Thanks for that information, Scott. They're valuable, and we all know that they truly are. I mean, you come out of there knowing things and having contacts that you never could have from just being here in Montana. So, you know, we all understand that, but we also understand we're in a global pandemic, and I'm not really interested in traveling right now. So we'll keep that on the board. Anybody else have any comments about that?
Yeah, I would agree with the conversation conclusions that Sean and your staff have. They are important things to do, but traveling out of state right now, yeah, I don't think that's a really good idea for us to push for. And hopefully at some point soon, extended travel will be reasonable again. But for right now, in-state's good for me.
So the only other thing I would add, and I think I touched on it briefly, is, you know, for the current fiscal year, we did budget for registration fees as well as travel costs. So you know, it's doubtful that I'm not sure, Scott, maybe you know exactly when would the NCTR trustee conference be held? Is it in July or August? I think it must be July.
It's the latter part of July. I want to say it's like the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, or somewhere right in there.
Okay.
And so, NCTR is like the 6th, 7th, and 8th of October.
Yep.
Scott, do you know where they are this year? Do they have a place?
Yes, the summer conference, the trustee conference, is at Berkeley, and the fall conference is in Atlanta.
So we'll do our budgeting for fiscal year 22 in May, and I guess I would suggest that we budget for fiscal year 22 as if it were going to be a normal year, and then, you know, to the extent that they have these conferences in person, both NCTR as well as GFOA, PRISM, et cetera, that we would at least have the budget authority built in to go to them, because our actual expenditures for employee out-of-state travel this year is going to be way lower than normal, just because we haven't attended really any conferences at all since the outbreak. But I guess that would be my suggestion. We'll budget as if it's going to be a normal year, and we can adjust by not going or by going virtually if that's what ends up needing to happen in next fiscal year.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, well, just the next meeting date is May 7th. We just discussed that. And we can move on if we're done there. Any other questions on the administrative business? There is, opportunity for public comment as well. All right. Then let's move on to Denise, the legal counsel summary report.
Madam Chair, members of the board, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So as far as contested cases are concerned, we don't have much. If you recall at the December meeting, you issued a final determination in the Mark Thane matter, and his benefits have been recalculated, and appropriate action has been taken based on the board's final decision in that case. The other pending contested matter that we have is the Edward Zabrocki matter. We received the classification order from the Supreme Court on January 20th. They have classified the case as a submission on briefs to a 5-justice panel. The Supreme Court will classify a case either as a case to go before the full 7-justice Supreme Court, and typically that involves oral arguments, or they deem it submitted on the briefs and submit it to a 5-justice panel. The board's internal operating guidelines indicate they try to put an order out within 120 days of the classification order, so somewhere around the end of April. I wouldn't necessarily expect to see an order from them any sooner than that. So hopefully before the next board meeting, we'll have a decision in Zabrocki. We don't have any other contested case matters pending right now. Lots of other things going on from a legal standpoint, but just, standard work in TRS. So unless there are questions, I think that's probably it.
Yes, that's good news, Denise.
It is good news.
Any questions for Denise? All right, seeing none, then we'll look at the applications and benefit adjustments.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the board, as part of your packet, you can see that kind of a slower time of the year, but we processed 36 applications for retirement, with the majority of them being from the school district, 31 to be exact. So that information is there for your purposes, information purposes only. So if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy.
So, Madam Chair and members of the board, so the packet that I emailed the link to you for earlier last week actually shows this report. This packet, since this is a public Zoom meeting, I remove it from the packet that we use during the board meeting, just because it includes people's names, their average final compensation, their term pay, and all of that. So I guess just for future use as well as for today, just understand that when we get to this portion of the meeting where we talk about the board quarterly report, during the meeting, I'm not going to pull it up. So if you have any questions as you review your packet ahead of time, you certainly can ask those, and Tammy has access to the report and would be able to answer those. But I just don't think we've never really provided that information during the FOIA requests and that. So that's why I removed it from the packet that we use during the board meeting, just so you're aware.
All right, thank you. Right now we have built in a break, and I know that Dan Villa is supposed to be here at 10:15. Is that correct, Sean?
Yes, that's correct.
Do we have anything we want to put in here right now? Maybe like the privacy and security of personal information, or are we good with having a half an hour break and coming back?
Madam Chair, we certainly could cover the strategic plan. Actually, well, we'd have about 25. The board training would be close. I mean, if you wanted to do that instead, and then have the director from BOI's report, and then wrap up whatever left. I think board training would definitely take us probably close to 10:15 though. Denise, you can chime in if you think it can be shorter than that. If you think it's about 20 minutes, we should probably hit that one.
Wow, I'm having mouse problems. I apologize. Actually, this is one of our shorter board trainings. I think we can easily be done by 10.
Okay, that'd be great. Let's do that.
Let me
move the board training, privacy and security of personal information to right after the application for benefits. and then we'll take a break, and then we will have the Board of Investments annual report.
Okay, are we ready to go then?
Yes.
So the policy we're dealing with is up on the screen for all of you to look at, and we've gone through this before. There have been no changes to the content of the policy since the last time we looked at this, but of course this, the requirement for protection of personally identifiable information is the defined term, comes directly from state statute. It applies to all state agencies, and it is not a comprehensive security policy, but it deals with very, specific and very personal types of information for our members, et cetera. So personal information essentially under the statute and under this policy is a first name or first initial with a last name that occurs in combination with any one or more of the data elements listed in the policy. So a social security number, a tax identification number, an identity protection personal identification number issued by the IRS, a driver's license number, the reference to 1612-501 is to the state issued identification card that is not a driver's license, a tribal identification number or enrollment number, an ID number issued by any state, the District of Columbia, or the other territories of the United States, an account number or credit or debit card number in combination with any required security code, access code, or password that would permit access to a person's financial account, and medical record information. And medical record information was a more recent, was about the last specific item of personal identification or personal information added to this policy. We get very little for medical record information, but we do receive medical information. Of course, you see every time you review a disability determination request. So that information is handled especially sensitively. It's maintained and available to only a couple of people in the office, and it is maintained in a locked file cabinet while it's on premises. So in general, if you go down to what is actually the policy section there, so section 1 specifies, and this is sort of a standard in privacy policies, that if you receive, use, and disclose personal information or private information, you describe how and why you do that. And of course, as a retirement, as a pension plan, we have a number of reasons for obtaining personally identifiable information, both financial account information, social security numbers, and both, for purposes of ensuring that we have correctly identified the person we're making benefit payments to, for direct deposit of benefit payments, and for tax reporting purposes. We have to gather social security numbers, and we have to gather whole social security numbers. There are a number of reasons, places and reasons that you can truncate a social security number, but for our purposes, on all of our benefit recipients, and in fact, we require a full social security number on any identified, any designated beneficiary by a member, because we're going to have it at the time of payment to a beneficiary, both for identification and for tax reporting purposes. So, we have full social security numbers. There's no question about that. Again, we also collect, on most of our members, we have financial account information because a large majority of our members receive their benefit payments by electronic funds transfer. Subpart 2 indicates how we will use and disclose information in general. And this is also the standard. You gather, maintain, use, and disclose personal information only as necessary to perform the duties and functions of the retirement system. And each of our employees is trained as well that respective to each of them, that is the standard. If you don't need access to personal information to perform your duties and functions, you don't access the information. With that being said, you'll note in subpart 3 that pretty much all of our staff have access to personal information through one work process or another, whether it's data entry, whether it's opening mail, whether it's loading pension retirement applications. There are no jobs in TRS where the person for performance of job duties and functions do not have access to PII. Subpart 4 specifies, and this is a requirement of the state statute and a general requirement, that where we gather full Social Security numbers only where necessary to establish identity of the member, the retiree, the benefit recipient or individual in general. And we use or disclose full Social Security numbers only when absolutely necessary to perform whatever business function we are performing in disclosing that information. Otherwise, we truncate Social Security numbers. And of course, I think we talked about this last year. TRS has also implemented randomly generated TRS member identification numbers that we use internally for member identification purposes. We don't any longer code people's or tag people's documents in our imaging system with their Social Security numbers. We write at the top of them their identification numbers to make sure they get imaged to the correct person. We use Social Security numbers in as limited a capacity as we absolutely need to. We don't, same thing goes if we are disclosing information to third parties. If we can provide them truncated Social Security numbers for the work they have to do for us, that's what we do. We do have a number of third-party providers, not a lot, a couple, who the work they do for us requires we provide them full Social Security numbers, so we always do that in a secure file transfer sort of process. Other than as described in this policy, as stated in subpart 6, we don't disclose personal information to any third party unless it's expressly authorized by the individual. So we have a release of information authorization form, including the fact that when I'm working with attorneys for the parties in doing family law orders or the like, the member has to complete and submit a release of information authorization that allows us to disclose information to individuals for those purposes. We have secure disposal processes internally for waste paper and the like that has personal information on it. TRS staff are directed not to store or maintain unencrypted records or documents. This gets back to Scott's question earlier as well on portable media or electronic devices, except as absolutely necessary to perform their job duties and functions, and only for the limited time during which it's necessary. Now, that is a little bit different from the VPN process that John pointed out, because when somebody comes in through the VPN, they are accessing their the records and documents in the TRS system. They're not necessarily being downloaded to the portable device or portable media. This is something we talk about internally when we do this training, that, you know, we don't put member information on thumb drives. We don't put it on laptops to go to the, you know, to the various retirement trainings that are done around the state each year and that sort of thing. Access is done through VPN access to TRS's data systems. We contractually require any third-party contractor or vendor to whom we provide personally identifiable information that they have a policy that's at least as stringent as ours for the protection of the protected information as well. We have a separate, what we title a third-party agent agreement that lays all of those requirements out. And if we provide information to somebody for functions they perform on our behalf, they sign one of those along with the standard contract terms. On the last page of the policy, the second sort of major part of the state statute is related to notice of breach of security of a data system. So if a state agency's data system is breached, or if our records in the hands of a vendor are breached, and the information is in an unencrypted format where we can believe or reasonably assume that the personal information of individuals has been accessed, we are required to notify those people of the potential breach of their personal information. We are also, under subpart 3, you will note, required to notify the Attorney General's office and the Attorney General's Office of Consumer Protection of the breach. We are required to send written notice to individuals whose information we believe has been breached. And I believe the last time Brett Dahl came and talked to us, he talked to some, you know, to a fairly great length regarding the insurance coverage, the liability coverage that's available to the state for cybersecurity breaches, et cetera, and the steps they take in responding, including, you know, written notice, providing the cost of monitoring of credit accounts or credit reporting and that sort of thing. So there's a whole process that is put in place if our data, our PII, is breached either in our own secure data systems or those of a vendor. That's, again, this is one of our shorter board education. If there are any questions, anybody have any?
I'm assuming you need me to sign this, Denise?
No, Carrie, the policy is not, this is simply training on the current policy. Again, there has been no change made to the policy since the last time you signed it, so it's not being authorized at this point. It's simply being trained on.
Perfect, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's it, again, unless there are additional questions.
Perfect timing. All right, well, let's take a 15-minute break and come back right at 10:15 or a little bit before, please, so that we can be ready for Dan. And I'm going to introduce Dan Villa from the Board of Investments. Welcome today, and thank you for coming in to present to us.
You bet. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you. Dan Villa, Executive Director, Montana Board of Investments, here to make our annual presentation to you as required by 176230 Montana Code. I'm going to try to just stick to the specific elements and bullets that's called for within the statute this year, but I want to make sure that this is more conversational than, you know, Socratic. So please feel free, jump in, ask any questions you may have as I go through, and happy to answer any questions you may have at the end as well. So beginning on the first slide, the first element that we are to discuss with you is our asset allocation. And what I did here is you can see the 19 allocation as well as the 20. And you'll remember from last year, we were able to deploy some of that liquidity that had been set aside in prior years. And we consolidated cash not only within all of the asset classes, but also within the cash asset class itself to that 0 to 4 range in the prior year. That was very accretive to the plan because as we deployed that cash, we had great buying opportunities, which is my way of saying March sucked. But we were able to really put that cash to work at an opportune time. And you'll see that in the results that I'll get into in a moment. The other changes we made this year, again, we are moving into more illiquid asset classes. And you see that in the 2020 asset class allocations. You'll see that we did expand our maximum in private investments. And we were able to expand our allocation in real assets, formerly known as natural resources. So we're not only expanding the opportunity set available to you and the Impera systems, but we're able to do so because Montana's pension systems are in what I will call such relatively good shape. We're able to deploy these assets for a longer term for a better return because we have the liquidity necessary from contributions and investment earnings to make benefit payments. You'll also see that we did put a little bit more into international equities. That is sort of a recognition. We have had a very much domestic equity bias over the last 20 years, which has served you and us very, very well. We're going to start dipping our toe into not equalizing, but gaining some additional international exposure. Haven't really moved much in that space, but it does give us another, again, opportunity set to move. You'll see that we cut the core fixed income allocation precipitously. As you all know, fixed income has a very challenging future ahead of it as far as yields. This is a conversation with the legislature. It's a conversation for all of us. We are not in a position to fight the Fed, nor should we. So we're redeploying those assets into higher yielding, less liquid asset classes. Non-core fixed income, we did restructure this portfolio a bit. And we are adding in this space. We've got emerging market debt that is new to the portfolio this year. One of the questions that we struggled with for a while was, is emerging market debt something that the board wants to get exposure to? And as we looked at it, we said, well, we've got international equities. International debt is more secure, so why would we be afraid of that particular asset class? So it was a good non-correlated asset, and we've been able to add that in. We're also getting into preferreds and converts for the first time. So again, I guess the story from 19 to 20 is we were able to deploy the cash assets at an opportune time, expand the opportunity set, and because of the health of the systems, invest in illiquid, better return opportunities. Maybe I'll pause there, see if there's any questions on the asset allocation. Okay, moving on, past and expected investment performance. If there was a drum roll on Zoom, now would be the moment. Inception to date, as of December 31, 2020, TRS is at 7.91%. So we are very happy with the inception to date numbers. We've got a very strong 1 year. These numbers are up. We'll have our quarterly reports fairly soon for the board. January was a great month, so it's, we're in a good spot. But again, don't count your chickens, because as Sean and I nervously call each other every day leading up to June 30th, please don't have the correction today. Please don't have the correction today. But the numbers are voting fairly well. We do have an 11% that will be a little north of 11% that will be dropping from the smoothing this year. So we're right in that ballpark of where we need to be in order to maintain the amortization period and funded ratios that are currently being used. The next slide, you've got sort of the big chart, the monthly reports that we use. This shows the NAV of all of the asset types across the state. Wanted to more give this to you as sort of a lens into what the board, and in particular Jeff, looks at on your behalf. These are what we prepare each month. You will see the one that impacts you. If you go to the very last column, second chart from the bottom, the bar chart, STIP average yield. Again, this is our why we need to better manage liquidity. We're not getting those short-term yields that we were able to rely on. We're now down, in the 23 bips for STIP yield, which is why we want to minimize our cash exposure, not only within TRS, but across the entirety of the portfolio. So unless there's any questions on performance, the investment goals and strategies, we continue to lean into perpetual fund. We are not in this for the short term. We're not timing the market. We may be lucky in that we make strategic decisions that happen at an opportune time. I would point at the cash carry that we had and our ability to deploy that at a good time. But we are still very much at the strategic level rather than the tactical. We are making those decisions based on a 30-year amortization period. We are not investing your dollars or the people's dollars in a way that is chasing yield with an absent mind toward risk. So, we see some opportunities out there within additional diversification, as I mentioned, preferreds and converts. Again, those are things we will step into, not jump into. We definitely don't want to be into the position of immediately deploying assets en masse and exposing you or any of our other systems to undue risk. Next slide, TRS, our cap investments and performance compared to similar sized public employee retirement plans in other states. So in this last biennium, we did not do this report on an annual basis. I had some budgetary challenges, which I may have mentioned in my first year on the job. Now heading into my third, we fixed those, but we were able to do this report from CEM benchmarking, independent third-party analysis of our performance and costs in the year before the legislative session. So not only would you have it, we would have it, and the legislature would have it as they consider changes either to the investment statutes that govern me under Title 17 or the pension statutes that govern you. As you can see, our 5-year policy return was above the U.S. public median and our peer median. So from a return perspective, we are doing very well. Again, it won't surprise many of you. We do have a bias away from hedge funds, and boy, has that been, this is the week to take credit for that. So our policy return is in a good place relative to our peers and the median. And if you go to the next slide, you can see our costs were below our peers as well. Now, I do have some good news on this space as well. If you look at the global TAA, about halfway down that chart, we've eliminated that as an asset. When we did our consolidation of the non-core fixed income, we no longer have global tactical asset allocation as part of the portfolio. It was high cost. We were basically replicating the market generally with those. So we decided to get out of that. You won't see this in future reports. The other thing that we have taken on is within our non-core fixed income, with our high yield space, we have undertaken a project to lower our fees to our high yield managers. That is a place, again, as you can see, that we were a bit above the median, and that's a place we've got to. As you know, there's two places you can make money: higher yield or lower fees, so your net return is better. We are going to focus on that high yield space for the next few months to get better fees, structures, lower costs there. Otherwise, we like where we're at. We continue to challenge expenses at the board side, and that again will become accretive to your returns as we're able to lower our costs and expenses.
Hey, Dan.
Yes.
This is Dan Trost, and I actually had a question that I maybe should have asked a minute ago, but I couldn't get my mute button off quick enough. On the asset allocation changes in those ranges, do you guys think in terms of a target, and is that sort of the midpoint, or does that move more substantially than that, or how do you think about in terms of where we want to be within that range? It's a pretty wide range on each of the asset classes.
Yeah, so we did not, prior to July of 2019, we did not think in the context of midpoints or targets. And it was my opinion that that was a shortcoming of the portfolio. So what we did at that point in time is between 2018 and 2019, we built the ranges around a midpoint. So we now are our reporting and our macro attribution is built around the midpoint of these ranges. That does not necessarily mean it is a target. We have not had the conversation yet of whether or not that midpoint should be a target, or whether or not the midpoint is a good place to measure for a macro attribution. Because again, these are, as you mentioned, very wide ranges, and we thought it was better that we start reporting, which we did not report macro attribution prior to 2019. We needed to get down into that level of granularity. So we now, when we do the quarterly reports, we added strategic, tactical, manager, alpha analysis based on those midpoints. So they function as a target, but I would say that they are a target only only as they are the mathematical midpoint of the range, not because we have made a conscious decision to build the ranges around a overweight or underweight position within those ranges. The CIO does do that as part of our rebalancing efforts on a monthly basis, but the asset allocation is not built around a target, but we do measure from the midpoint for macro attribution. Does that help?
It does. That makes good sense. The follow-up, I guess, I think the idea of moving toward maybe some less liquid or some higher performing long-term assets may lead to some short-term volatility, and there's some political risk, I think, associated with that. Is that part of the conversation too when you're making these decisions?
Absolutely. Particularly in this year, the write-downs in real estate and some of our other assets were very prevalent and very present, particularly in the office space asset mix. But to that end, we've sort of been looking at the risk associated with those investments. So we started moving away from hotels well before COVID and those sorts of issues because of operational challenges, other fiscal challenges associated with that particular asset class, and started moving more into grocery anchored tenants. So the risk associated with those illiquids are absolutely part of the conversation. And then it's also, again, mitigated by the perpetual nature of the fund. Within CAP itself, we do not have, our target is 30 years, 7.65, 7.5, and that 1 quarter blip is not something that we're going to build the entirety of the asset allocation around. It may cause us political challenges, as you mentioned, with the legislature, with a 25% write down in the real estate value, but it is substantially more accretive with a higher expected return over the longer duration, and that's what we're after here.
Sense. Thank you.
You bet.
Dan, this is Dan Chamberlain. There's now 3 of us on this line. It could get a little confusing.
Well, there's if you want to see confusing, you got to come over to BOI, because I just hired a chief legal. So we've got Dan W, Dan V, Dan Z. We've got John R, John C, John P. We got Peggy and Peggy, and now on the board we've got Jeff and Jeff. So it's kind of, Northern European, very mono natured of names. So
yeah. So I have a couple of questions. When you are developing strategies for purchasing either domestic or international equities, do you have an emphasis on value or growth, or how do you make those choices?
So we have, there are a number of studies out, and our investment consultant, RVK, has done some of them. Value and growth is kind of a weird question for us, given that we hire the external managers and we no longer manage the portfolio in-house. So as we're going out to look for domestic and international equity managers who will do that active management on our behalf, we can build that into the conversation, but really we're looking at their net yield, their performance over time, their management structure, all of those things that you go through on a due diligence process for manager selection. And the value growth proposition works themselves out in the bottom line. So it's a bit weird for us to really dip our toe into value versus growth, because we're hiring the managers to actively manage the asset classes, and we're looking at far more than that as the decision point. It's a component, but I wouldn't say it's a component that will make or break the decision to hire a manager.
So then let me dig into that a little bit. When you're evaluating external managers and looking at past performance, do you emphasize a benefit in seeing external managers that have specifically clear disciplines? Or do you prefer external managers that just have good, consistent performance, partly because they allow complete and total flexibility in the organization of their assets?
So I would say that we do not go as far as maximum or complete and utter, I forget your phraseology, but we look for those managers who have historically good performance, who have a product offering and an asset mix that melds well with our other asset classes and portfolio. I think we do have a bias in large cap that tends to drive more than sort of a value growth proposition, but small, mid, large is more of a conversation point. And how those 3 move together or don't, and their correlations, rather than the value or growth proposition. But our general view on particularly domestic and international. I mean, international's got to be active. It's just we don't have the expertise. There isn't really a good passive way to get into international. Domestic. We're looking at whether or not active large cap is a value add, and there's a lot of questions around that. But then the passive space, you can't, the cost how am I'm not phrasing myself well, so give me a second. The value add of active, small, and mid is about on par with passive large, if that makes sense. So as we look at managers, those are the sorts of mixes we're looking for within those boundaries.
Okay. And one last question. On your international exposure now, what percentage of that is emerging market?
I don't have that offhand, but I will get it for you.
Would you expect that that is increasing as we go forward inside external managers?
As a manager, I think mathematically it will necessarily have to be, because if we put money there, you don't see Europe with the same margins or growth prospects as emerging space. I mean, China's still emerging space. So I think mathematically you would most likely see that. But let me get back to you on our percentages within the international space. But my gut tells me that, as we look for yield, the developing world is not as opportune as the emerging world.
Yeah, I think it's not only growing faster, but it's also cheaper by contrast with the US at this point. Right. Well, thank you for those answers. I appreciate it.
You bet. So any other questions on this? Okay.
And I would just add this, listening to the staff when they talk about how they vet groups for being managers. One of the things I remember them talking about is they have a particular stated philosophy. So Dan, when they look at that philosophy, the issue they want to know is, are they sticking with that philosophy? Are they disciplined in doing what they say they do? And then looking at the rest of that information. So that's how that part, I think, connects, at least in my mind.
Yeah. As we all know, discipline is a bit of the name of the game. That if you're just out there chasing yield for any old reason, that's where you start to trip off. So our biggest risk within the equity classes is manager selection. If we get a manager wrong, we've got way bigger problems than any sort of market event or massive sell-off or liquidity issue. Our biggest risk is manager selection, and that was no more present in this last year. We are not willing to compromise our due diligence process, but we also weren't able to get out and meet with new managers as we were in lockdown. So we were able to meet our pacing goals for this year by going to existing managers who we've known for a long time, worked with, have assets, and we were buying into their new funds as we were able. So one of our challenges moving forward is being able to expand our bench of managers and really conduct that thorough due diligence process that we need to be doing. So that's one of the things that's not quite front burner, but it's going to get there pretty quick because we only have a certain universe of managers that are going to be out back in the market at any given time. And we don't want to screw up our vintage years for our pacing and all of a sudden have that off in case that year A is no better than year B or something else. So I digress a bit, but manager selection is tantamount to meeting that actuarial expectation you give us. This slide really, it's sort of the number, the bottom line, total investment cost versus our benchmark cost. And you can see we do have, we are under our benchmark, or I'm sorry, we do not have the excess cost. We're in a good spot. So, these speak to not only our asset mix, but our efficiencies within the resources and the rates that we're allowed to take, as well as what we pay to managers who manage all of our funds. And on the last chart, or the last page, I'm sorry, implementation style, and this is where you really start to see your why the asset mix and our stylistic changes are accretive. As I mentioned before, we don't have hedge funds. That has been very, very value. That has been a tremendous value add to all of us. And you can see that domestic bias has been the domestic bias of the acting U.S. particularly has done particularly well for us on the cost side. So with that, that is what I am required to talk to you about by statute. But certainly with our relationship, happy to answer any questions any of the committee may have, Madam Chair.
We have any questions for him? We've got him here. Let's, if anybody has anything.
Well, Dan, I'd just like to make one more comment to both you and Jeff. The point I was driving at earlier, sometimes managers are actually benefited long-term by not having two terribly clearly defined ideologies about their process. An example, there's a fund out there you may have heard of called the Lord Abbott Growth Leaders Fund. It's been around for a long time. They made a 60% profit in 2020 because the majority of their holdings were the high-flying tech names. And then in late December, they sold them off almost entirely. They held a small part of Apple and they started buying undervalued industrial stocks and material stocks, mostly because of the political conclusion that they believe an infrastructure bill is coming down the pike. Those sectors are tremendously undervalued. And consequently, what got us here in 2020 is not the same stuff that will get us there now and beyond. So I was just curious as to how you make those evaluations on those managers, because I think that can be crucially important.
Maybe what I'll do, Dan, is give you, because I think it would be value add for all of the board members, we'll send you over our due diligence process so you can see what we're looking at in that manager selection. As we're going out for manager selection, I think it'd be value add for all of you to see what we're looking at, how we're verifying it, what our kicking of the tires process looks like and how it builds into the portfolio structure overall. So I'll make sure I get that to Sean to distribute to all of you.
Appreciate that.
You bet.
Dan, would you speak to potential changes that you might see forthcoming as a result of the uneasiness going on with the whole GameStop issue?
GameStop, Silver, AMC, that is all I've been asked about in the halls of the legislature. Nobody cares about the net returns or the actuarial assumptions. It's, how much did we make on GameStop? To which the response is, well, we weren't playing over there. I think the changes will be more federal and they will matriculate out. And let me give you an example of how federal and international changes impact us. We are a big fish within the context of the state of Montana. We've got, orders of magnitude more assets under management than anyone else. And we are still a little bitty, teeny tiny minnow in the universe of the U.S. So out comes the executive orders on particular investments in China. And I know we hold some of those. Some of those were held by the board at the time the executive orders came out by our managers. We were wondering what do we do and how do we do it to deal with this. And I participate in a group. It's the sovereign wealth funds in the Western U.S. So it's basically everything from North Dakota down to Texas west, except Hawaii. All of us all of the peers of mine get on the horn and we compare notes. And what we all decided, excuse me, California doesn't play. They're their own nation state. So it's good. And what we all universally decided was whatever happens, we don't have the market share or the ability to impact any of the decision points along. So what we then have to do is look to our managers, because again, we don't internally manage those particular stocks, whether it be a GameStop or some form of a China holding. And we just have to look at them. And there was this short period where we didn't know what MSCI was going to do. We didn't know if they were going to sell them off, if they were going to have to make us, or if we were going to have to go create a separate account. We had no idea. So the best we could do was participate in some all state meetings with MSCI, BlackRock, Northern Trust, the big passive managers, active managers, and say, you got to sell these off. And it was only by the collective group convincing MSCI you got to liquidate these assets on our behalf, as opposed to make us go somewhere else to get it, that we were able to facilitate any changes in our portfolio directly. And I think the GameStop issues will be much the same. We don't have hedge funds, we don't short, we don't have any of those things. We have some 130/30 managers that we're waiting for our monthly reports on. But relative to our ability to actively manage individual stock holdings, we really gave that up in 2005, and it will be up to the federal government changes being implemented by our managers in order for us to be in compliance or to get there. We just don't have the staff, and I don't want to increase the cost to get the staff. The cost benefit isn't right.
Thanks, Dan. You know, the intent of the question was more the long-term kinds of things, but I think you covered several other aspects there that I thought were very valuable.
Yeah, and I think the long term there is to be more direct. We are going to look at the 130/30 exposure we've got, and that will be, you know, if there is some sort of structural changes within the shorts, that is the place that it would show up for us, because we don't have the hedge fund. We don't have the hedge fund exposure.
Any other questions for Dan?
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I very much appreciate it.
You betcha.
And just FYI, they will be voting on Mr. Greenfield's confirmation this afternoon in Senate State Administration. So the confirmation process is moving along.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I guess I didn't actually say public comment, but I hoped that everyone had their opportunity to say something if they wanted to. Is there anybody from the public that had a question for us, for the board? Okay.
This isn't a question, it's just a comment. I think that I think you're all doing a great job of monitoring these, and we really appreciate the chance to sit in and watch this as well as MFPE so that we can report out to members. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's move on to then our long-range planning.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the board, in your board packet, there's a copy of our commitment worksheet. I'm going to blow it up a little bit so it's easier to see. So the red font is updated or things that have been completed. You know, we go through this every meeting, so I don't know that there's a lot of value in me restating each goal and objective. I think I'll just move sort of quickly through them. And then if the board has any questions, you can either stop me as we go on each page, or you can ask them at the end. But maintain an actuarially sound qualified plan. The outcome was risk analysis report. And as you all know, we got that report last May in 2020. The second piece of that was identify a process or consultant to do a IRS compliance review, and that also was completed in July of 2020. We utilized Ice Miller services for that. The third piece, well, 2 and 3 were kind of tied together, actually. So these two were tied together, and those were both completed by Ice Miller. We received that report in July of 2020. And we actually received it in time to incorporate anything that would have been necessary into our housekeeping bill. There really wasn't anything that came about as a result of that qualification review that ended up in our housekeeping bill, except for the required minimum distribution changes, which actually were driven by federal legislation in the spring prior to that. The last one here is M-Trust system enhancement and work process review. We have, and I just have the status of that is in process. We have been contracting all this fiscal year with both AMA, who's our programmers, and Rising Stars, who's our project manager and test lead. And we have incorporated quite a few enhancements to M-Trust during the current fiscal year. This is an area I think that we need to do a deeper dive when we meet in August to do our full-on strategic planning, and so that I get a better sense of what the board's commitment is going forward. M-Trust is now essentially a completely built out system, and the things that we're working on now are primarily enhancements to that system. And I know that myself and the management team will need to get a better feel for what the board's commitment is, or what it should be going forward. I mean, is this something that we want to continually spend $300,000 to $400,000 a year on by the time you include our maintenance contract, or do we want to scale that back? And of course, obviously, some of the questions that I'm sure you would ask are, well, what kind of enhancements would we be looking to do next, and what kind of savings would they create? And those are things that we'll have to have prepared for you when we do our full strategic plan in August of this upcoming year. So we'll definitely update this strategic component when we meet in August. But as far as the current year and the current goal, this is underway, and some great things have come about as a result of that. We're working right now on requirements for online withdrawals, and that's scheduled to be actually implemented by the time this fiscal year closes around June 30th. So there's been a lot of work in that area. Tammy continues to be our business expert and spends quite a bit of her time working with M-Trust enhancements, and those have all been going really well. Moving to page 2, and I actually sort of called out online withdrawals here. So one of our goals is workflow analysis improvement, including automation, improved processes, system enhancements, et cetera. You all know we have online beneficiary designations available to our membership now, which those have been a great help. And like I just sort of mentioned, we're in the process of finalizing requirements for online withdrawals. And this is really going to be the first online outward-facing module that we have built that really allows for financial transactions. So we have a lot of security implications that go along with this, and we're sort of checking those boxes as we're working on it, and it's going to improve our overall MyTRS system greatly by the time it's all done. I mean, we are going to implement two-factor authentication as part of this, so that's all looking really well, really good. The second one on this page is process and system documentation. This kind of deals with sort of developing desk manuals, flowcharts, and procedures to document workflow processes. And then we were going to engage technical writers to job shadow and prepare documentation. We haven't really made any headway on this this year, being remote really since March for most of the staff. It has been a little bit of a hurdle, although even if they were here in person, I don't know that we would have had time to get this started this fiscal year, but it's one of the things that we'll look forward to maybe getting to in fiscal year 22. And we did put a time frame on that of 21 through 2022. So it's not that we're necessarily behind on that one. We knew it was something we want to get to. It's just not one of our higher priorities like some of the ones we already talked about. The next one dealt with the old TRS building on 6th Avenue. Obviously, we were able to complete the remodel of that building. We actually had it leased out for a short period of time prior to selling it, and the sale was actually completed in October of 2020, so that one is complete. The next one dealt with our a future hiring of an internal auditor or a compliance person, however you want to phrase it. We had decided earlier in the year that that we were going to push that out to next fiscal year. So when we budget in May, we'll budget to fill that position. Tammy and I have a little bit of work to do there as far as figuring out exactly what that position description would look like and the pay range for it. But I think there are some definite improvements that can be made in the accuracy of what is being reported to TRS. This person would work in that area at least part-time as far as reviewing employer reports and making sure people are reported to the correct system, as well as providing oversight or review of our internal controls that the rest of the staff uses. So I think that this is still something that we want to do, but we, like we had discussed in prior meetings, we want to push that out till next fiscal year. The last one on that page is continue with formal strategic planning every 2 years, and I already alluded to this. We would be scheduled then to do our sort of full-on, 3/4 of a day or so strategic planning session this coming August, where we would use the services of CMS and Jim Cairns to help facilitate that. That's always been a real productive session every time we've done it previously, so I'm looking forward to that. Okay, the final page here deals with several communication and outreach goals and objectives, and there has been no additional necessarily progress since we last met in December, but there has been progress made in this area sort of all the time, for lack of a better way to describe it. I mean, Darla is quite busy updating forms as necessary to match changes in our business process as a result of various M-Trust enhancements. That's sort of always ongoing behind the scenes, and those updates go out. We do have available now, and I talked about this last time, we have available TRS 101 videos, as well as the Ready, Set, Retire seminar video, and those were presented at the MSPE conference. Some of our outreach that took place this last fall was not only the MSPE conference, but we had several statewide Zoom meetings where TRS benefit officers did the Ready, Set, Retire presentation, and Darla did the TRS 101 presentation. And those were well received, and I think there's a good dialogue going on between Darla and MSPE on potentially doing more of that in the future, doing some of them as remote, as well as how those could be improved. So I think we've made a lot of progress in communication and outreach in the current year, and we'll continue to do so through the end of this fiscal year. And it's obviously something we can always improve upon, so I'd expect a lot of these to be moved forward into our next formal strategic plan. With that, Madam Chair, I can answer any questions the board might have.
I guess I was just going to say, we also talked to Jim as we went through this with Sean, and he listens to us and we add things as we go. But if you have other things that you think about, you know, that's something to throw out there in August, things that we need to work on as a board and as having Sean work on for us and the staff. So what our goals are, and then in turn, that's kind of how we look to evaluate Sean.
Yeah, and I guess that the only thing I'd add to that, Madam Chair, is, you know, this doesn't have to be a static document for the whole 2 years, kind of like what you alluded to. If something were to come up and we thought it was of great strategic importance, we could add this at any one of our board, add that as an item at any one of our board meetings. That's a good point.
Yeah, and the ones like we talked about that are done, the building is gone, you know, that doesn't need to stay on there. We don't have to need to discuss it every meeting. They'll go away. So, yeah. All right. Any public comment right there on our strategic objective, or on our long-term planning and strategic planning? Okay. Well, oh,
sorry. Sorry, if I could just jump in again. This is Sarah Piper with MFPE. I would second, Darla has been wonderful to work with. Our members are really appreciative of having those 2 webinars posted. And actually this coming week on, I think Wednesday, we'll be teaming up, she and I, well, I don't know exactly who's coming from that side, but I think she's on vacation. But we'll be working with Missoula County. They actually reached out to schedule it for their new hires as part of their mentorship program that they run for people within their first 5 years. And the fact that it's remote has made that really, really efficient, because then they can watch the video in advance and then participate in a question and answer session. So we've gotten great feedback from our members on that structure. Obviously, there's a need for in-person stuff. I think we're all craving that at this point in the pandemic as well. But I think moving forward, having a mix of those is going to be a really effective way to reach out to members who can't necessarily travel from the far corners of Montana on a weeknight to attend something like that. So thank you guys for adding that into the options that are available. We really appreciate it.
yeah, and I would love to see more of that. We at Kalispell School District also have a mentorship and induction program, and because I'm part of that, I can help with the TRS thing, but it has been amazing to have those videos available and just the checklists, and just so they know what they're getting into. So, so many people tell you, you know, 8 or 20 years into it, I just didn't know. I didn't know what I had. Well, we want you to know. And so from our school district's perspective, like, that's an important thing. And I wish other school districts would do the same thing. I know lots of people have reached out to us about our induction and mentoring programs, and Missoula is another one that does that in the state. So it's kind of exciting to see that people might start knowing a little bit more about retirement and be curious about it and be actively involved in it. So thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that with you guys, your help as well.
Our pleasure.
Okay. Well, this is the time then we'll close our meeting for disability applications. Sean, do we have some?
Madam Chair, yes, we do have one. And so I'll give John a moment to make sure that anyone that is not supposed to be involved in the meeting once it's closed, to make sure they're out, and then we will get started. John, if you just want to let me know when we're down to our 6 board members, Tammy, myself, Denise, and you and Darla, then we can go ahead and get started with it.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now, and then I'll move people into the waiting room. Recording's been started.
Okay. We need a motion for the disability application in front of us for Ms. Gisette.
Madam Chair, this is Jeff
Make a
Greenfield.
motion.
I move adoption or approval of the disability application for Ms. Gisette.
Madam Chair, this is Janice Muller. I second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Janice Miller, aye.
Jeff,
Dan Trost,
aye.
aye.
Scott Dubs, aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Are there any opposed? Seeing none, the motion passes. All right, this is our last opportunity for public comment. If anyone from the public would like to say anything else, or any of our board members. Let's just hope, you guys, that we get to see each other in May. Maybe a lot of us will have had the vaccinations by then and it just won't matter.
Yes, hopefully. Could I just ask a quick question, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Jeff and Scott, do you want to just take a 15-minute break after adjournment and we'll start our legislative meeting at 11:30? Does that work?
I'm ready whenever you are, whether it's now or 15 minutes from now.
Me too. I can do whatever.
And Sean,
Okay.
I am to finish that letter that we have, and I'm going to forward it to you if you don't mind, that you could forward it to your staff from Janice and I and the board,
Okay.
about the personnel committee.
Okay, great. I'll do that.
Okay. All right. Well, we just need a motion for adjournment, please.
So moved. Dan Trost.
Second, Janice Muller.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 All right, we'll end the meeting then. Thank you.
Take care.